The courtroom lights seemed too bright, every eye fixed on the witness stand. Crockett leaned forward, voice steady, cutting through the air like a blade. "Mrs. Trump, are you prepared to tell this court the truth you've hidden from America?" The words detonated, and for a moment, time itself seemed to fracture. Gasps echoed, reporters scribbled furiously, and Melania's perfectly composed face betrayed the first flicker of unease. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no sound came. The silence was heavier than any answer cameras zoomed in. Every twitch, every hesitation was magnified into history. Crockett didn't flinch, his gaze unwavering, a soldier of truth facing down decades of privilege and secrecy. The tension was electric, the kind that makes strangers clutch each other's arms in disbelief. For years, Melania had lived in carefully curated shadows, her words measured, her presence untouchable. But now, under oath, the shadows had no place to hide. A single bead of sweat traced her temple, betraying the calm exterior. Crockett's question lingered like thunder in the room, daring her to deny, daring her to escape. But this was only the beginning, because what Crockett revealed next would peel back layers Melania never wanted exposed. This wasn't just another courtroom exchange. What unfolded before the cameras carried the weight of more than one woman's testimony. It was a referendum on truth itself. Crockett's words cut deeper because they were not aimed only at Melania. They pierced the silence of a nation weary of deception, longing for clarity. Every question he posed echoed beyond those walls. For immigrants who built lives brick by brick, for workers who endured insult and invisibility, this was a moment of representation. Here stood a man unafraid to demand answers from someone who had wrapped herself in glamour while quietly sidestepping accountability. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't about gossip or private embarrassment. It was about whether the most visible faces in power could be forced to speak honestly when truth was most inconvenient. Could wealth and privilege shield one forever, or would dignity and persistence prevail? As Crockett pressed forward, the tension wasn't merely about legal outcomes, it was about cultural memory. Future generations would remember whether this trial upheld America's ideals of equality before the law, or whether it once again bent to those who believed themselves untouchable. And to understand why Crockett's words landed like a hammer, you need to see the contradictions that had been hiding in plain sight. For years, Melania presented herself as an enigma, visible yet untouchable. She perfected the art of being seen without ever truly being known. On magazine covers, she was framed as elegance incarnate, flawless gowns, diamond smiles, a carefully sculpted aura of sophistication. She cultivated distance, letting mystery do the work that words never would. Silence became her armor, and in that silence she crafted power. But behind the sheen of designer labels and curated public moments lay questions that never seemed to find answers. Immigration papers, business dealings, public contradictions, all whispered about, rarely clarified. She thrived on ambiguity, a strategy that allowed her to float above scrutiny while ordinary people had to justify every line on their resumes, every entry on their forms. This duality became her trademark to admirers. She was poised, composed, a symbol of restraint. To critics, she was evasive, unwilling to own her narrative. In a world where millions struggled to prove legitimacy, Melania seemed to navigate with selective transparency, revealing only what benefited her image and concealing everything else. The irony was sharp. While she often spoke of values like loyalty and integrity, her own past remained draped in shadows. She allowed mystery to substitute for clarity, assuming the world would accept appearances as truth. But appearances are fragile. They can be shattered with one precise question, one inconvenient fact brought into the light. And that is exactly what made Crockett's confrontation seismic, because here was a man who understood that silence, no matter how artfully constructed, could not withstand the weight of truth. But if Melania had secrets to protect, Crockett had a story that made him the perfect figure to challenge her. Crockett's story didn't begin in marble halls or glittering ballrooms. It began in neighborhoods where hard work was survival, where every setback became another reason to push forward. Raised with discipline and grit, he learned early that dignity was not given freely, it had to be defended. While others sought shortcuts, Crockett embraced the grind, carrying himself with the steady conviction that truth could outlast any obstacle. Public service wasn't a career choice for him, it was a calling. He carried his community's struggles into every chamber, every courtroom, every moment where decisions shaped lives. His transparency became his trademark. No hidden past, no carefully shielded secrets, only a life of visible service. He didn't posture or conceal, he laid out his record plainly, trusting that integrity spoke louder than spin. This openness stood in stark contrast to Melania's cultivated ambiguity. Where she mastered silence, Crockett mastered clarity. Where she floated above accountability, he planted his feet firmly on the ground, refusing to let evasion replace honesty. And where her story seemed to vanish into shadows, his life was illuminated by the struggles he had endured and the victories he had earned for others. Crockett wasn't flawless, but his flaws were lived openly. They became part of his strength, reminders that resilience isn't about never falling, it's about rising with greater force each time. He embodied the principle that one's past should be a testament, not a secret. So when he stood in that courtroom, he carried more than legal expertise, he carried the weight of lived truth. His questions weren't sharpened just by evidence, but by years of fighting for fairness in a world that often denied it. His presence radiated the kind of moral clarity that could not be fabricated, no matter how carefully an image was styled. And that is why the moment mattered. When Crockett faced Melania, it was not a clash of equals, it was a clash of worlds, one built on openness, the other on evasion, one forged in service, the other in shadows. So when the two finally met under oath, the clash wasn't just personal, it was historic. The first exchange was almost gentle, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. Crockett leaned into the microphone, his voice calm, deliberate. "Mrs. Trump, could you confirm for the court the details of your entry into this country?" Melania's answer was crisp, rehearsed, almost mechanical. "I have always followed the law." She folded her hands tightly, her expression a mask of serenity. But Crockett didn't let the mask settle. He pressed again, this time narrowing the question, stripping away the protective layers. "And are you saying under oath that every document provided was without error, without omission, without alteration?" A murmur rippled through the gallery. Reporters bent lower over their notebooks. Melania's eyes flickered just for a second, betraying the strain beneath her poise. She countered with insistence, "I have nothing to hide." The words echoed, they felt hollow, suspended in the heavy air of the courtroom. Crockett tilted his head, letting the silence stretch, allowing every ear in the room to lean closer. The rhythm shifted. His questions began to tighten, each one sharper, closer to the bone. Melania deflected with composure, but the cracks were visible now, a longer pause before answering, a tighter grip on her clasped hands, the faintest trace of impatience crossing her face. The duel was no longer polite. It was a battle of endurance, her deflections against his persistence. Each answer she gave seemed less convincing than the last, while each question he asked landed heavier, building pressure like storm clouds gathering. The spectators felt it. Something was about to give. Crockett's eyes never wavered, and Melania's confidence was thinning by the minute. But Crockett wasn't finished, and what he said next shattered the silence with devastating precision. Crockett let the silence hang until it became unbearable. Then, with the precision of a surgeon, he asked the question he had been holding back, the one sharpened through months of preparation. "Mrs. Trump, if you truly have nothing to hide, can you explain why your sworn immigration affidavit does not match the employment records submitted from the same year?" The words cracked like lightning. A collective gasp filled the room. Reporters looked up in unison, their pens frozen. Jurors shifted in their seats, leaning forward as if drawn by gravity itself. For the first time, Melania's composure fractured. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze darted toward her attorneys, and the silence that followed was louder than any denial. Crockett didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His calm delivery was more devastating than outrage could ever be. "One document says you were modeling under contract, the other states you had not yet begun employment. Both cannot be true. Which one is the lie?" The tension was unbearable. Melania finally spoke, her accent thicker, her tone defensive. "This is misunderstanding. Paperwork mistakes happen." But the damage was done. The cracks were now chasms. Crockett's eyes remained steady, unwavering. "Mistakes do happen, but not on sworn documents, not when the stakes are this high. America's laws are written for everyone, Mrs. Trump, everyone, ma." Gasps erupted again. A juror covered her mouth. A spectator whispered, "He caught her." The press gallery buzzed like a hive, already envisioning the headlines. In that instant, the courtroom wasn't just a legal chamber, it was a stage where the myth of untouchability unraveled in real time. Melania tried to recover, but each word felt thinner than the last, her defenses crumbling under the weight of evidence and Crockett's relentless precision. He didn't gloat, he didn't smirk, he simply let the truth stand on its own, towering and undeniable. Within minutes, phones lit up across the nation. Hashtags like #Crockett Cornered and #Truth Under Oath surged to the top of trending lists. Clips of the exchange flooded timelines. Some laughed, others cheered, many felt vindicated. Here finally was someone who refused to let power disguise itself as innocence. The jury saw it, the country saw it, the world saw it. Crockett had landed the blow that turned a guarded facade into a crumbling wall. But the shockwaves didn't end in that courtroom, they were just beginning to ripple across the country. The courtroom exchange ended, but the battle was only beginning. Within minutes, the clip of Crockett's devastating question exploded across social media. Millions replayed the moment where Melania froze, her silence speaking louder than any denial could. The internet, never slow to pounce, transformed it into a digital bonfire. On Twitter, hashtags like #Crockett Cornered and #Truth Under Oath rocketed to the top of the trending list. Memes sprouted instantly, side-by-side images of Crockett's calm stare and Melania's faltering response captioned with lines like, "When receipts don't match the story." TikTok creators stitched the clip into skits, dramatic readings, even dance remixes. Commentators on both sides of the political aisle weighed in. Progressive voices hailed Crockett as a truth teller, finally exposing the arrogance of those who believed themselves above accountability. Celebrities joined in, posting one-liners of support that quickly went viral. Even late-night comedians found the exchange irresistible, building entire monologues around that one searing question. But it wasn't just entertainment. For many viewers, immigrants, workers, ordinary people long scrutinized over paperwork and proof. This was vindication. They saw their struggles mirrored in Crockett's relentless insistence on honesty. Social feeds filled with stories from people who remembered being grilled for a misplaced form or a missing stamp. "If I had to answer for every mistake," one user wrote, "why shouldn't she?" The cultural tide was unmistakable. This was no longer about one courtroom or one witness. It was a parable of truth versus concealment, accountability versus evasion. Crockett had struck a nerve, and the nation pulsed with the aftershock. And yet, beyond the noise and memes, one lesson echoed louder than any headline. When the echoes of laughter, outrage, and headlines began to fade, what lingered was not just the spectacle of a courtroom clash. It was the clarity of a principle made visible. Dignity will always outlast deception. Crockett had not set out merely to embarrass, nor to score points in a media circus. He had aimed at something larger, at the idea that truth, even when uncomfortable, is the only foundation strong enough to hold a democracy together. His confrontation reminded the country that service outshines spectacle. In a world of curated images and rehearsed narratives, his steady insistence on honesty felt radical. It wasn't about the glamour of who sat on the witness stand, but about the grit of those who believed America's laws and values must be applied to everyone equally. For those who have endured endless demands to prove themselves, immigrants, working families, the overlooked Crockett stand was a validation of their struggles and sacrifices. Courage, he showed, is not always loud. Sometimes it is the calm voice that refuses to yield, the unshaken stare that demands accountability. His questions were more than legal strategy. They became a mirror reflecting the difference between those who build a life on transparency and those who rely on evasion. And that mirror didn't just reflect Melania's contradictions, it reflected the country's choice. Would America side with the powerful who hide, or with the ordinary people who dare to be seen fully, flaws and all? The courtroom clash crystallized that choice, turning one exchange into a lesson etched in collective memory. Crockett's resilience became a reminder that truth has endurance, that integrity is not fragile, and that courage belongs not only to leaders, but to anyone willing to speak plainly when silence would be easier. Because in the end, this wasn't just about Crockett and Melania, it was about all of us. What unfolded in that courtroom was more than a clash of personalities. It was a defining moment, a collision between concealment and courage. Crockett cornering Melania wasn't gossip, it was history being written in real time. The piercing question, the silence that followed, the world's collective gasp. All of it revealed how fragile deception becomes when truth finally steps into the light. This moment will be remembered not because of who was embarrassed, but because of what it affirmed, that dignity, honesty, and service will always outweigh spectacle and evasion. It reminded us that accountability is not optional, that no one, no matter how protected, can forever outrun the truth. And now, that responsibility extends to us. We are the witnesses, the keepers of this story. By sharing it, by speaking about it, by carrying forward its lesson, we ensure that truth continues to ripple outward. So if you believe dignity matters more than deception, if you believe service matters more than spectacle, then join this movement, subscribe, share this story, and stand with those who refuse to be silenced. Because when truth is spoken boldly, it doesn't just corner one person, it empowers us all.